The coffee maker gurgled to life at 5:30 a.m., same as every morning for the past 8 years. I stood in our kitchen, watching the dark liquid drip into the pot, wondering when I'd started measuring my life in coffee cycles and care schedules. Outside our apartment window, the New England morning stretched gray and promising over the university campus, where today, finally, Cambria would graduate from law school. "Jared, did you pick up my cap and gown?" Cambria's voice drifted from the bedroom, sharp even at this hour. "Hanging in the closet," I called back, pouring myself a mug, "right where I put it last night." 8 years. 8 years of tuition payments, loan signatures, and managing her father's medical appointments while she attended classes and study groups. 8 years of being the supportive husband who kept everything running so she could chase her dreams. Today was supposed to be our victory lap. I pulled out my phone to check the morning schedule. Graduation ceremony at 10, reception at noon, then dinner with her father if he felt up to it. Simple enough. My thumb hovered over the screen when a text notification popped up from an unknown number. The message contained no words, just a video file. Something in my gut twisted as I downloaded it. The timestamp showed yesterday evening, 7:15 p.m. The location appeared to be inside the law school building. I pressed play. The video quality was grainy but clear enough. Cambria walked down a faculty hallway, glanced around, then approached a door marked Professor E. Spalding. She knocked twice, waited, then entered. The door closed behind her with a soft click, followed by the distinct sound of a lock turning. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the kitchen tile. "Everything okay out there?" Cambria called. "Fine," I managed, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. "Just dropped something." I replayed the video 3 times, each viewing making the reality sink deeper. 7:15 p.m. yesterday. The same time Cambria had texted me about staying late at the library for final preparations. The same Professor Spalding she'd mentioned countless times over the past semester. Her favorite instructor. Her mentor. My hands shook as I cleaned up the broken ceramic. 8 years of supporting her ambitions, 8 years of sacrificing my own career advancement to keep her father's medical care on track, 8 years of believing we were building something together. The phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. "Check the faculty access logs. Public records. You're an engineer. You'll figure it out." I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. Whoever sent this knew exactly who I was and what I did for a living. They also knew I'd have the technical skills to verify what they were showing me. "Jared, can you make sure Dad's morning medications are ready?" Cambria emerged from the bedroom, looking radiant in her silk robe. Her auburn hair caught the morning light streaming through the window. "I want to check on him before we leave for the ceremony." "Of course," I said automatically. I'd been managing her father's care schedule for so long, it had become second nature. The pill organizers, the appointment calendar, the insurance paperwork, all of it flowed through me while she focused on her studies. She kissed my cheek, her perfume familiar and comforting. "I can't believe it's finally here. All those late nights studying, all those papers and exams. We made it, honey." We. The word felt like sand in my mouth. "Yeah," I said, "we sure did." After she left to shower, I sat at my laptop and pulled up the university's public records portal. As a state institution, faculty access logs were available through Freedom of Information requests. I'd used similar systems in my engineering work, tracking building access for security audits and maintenance schedules. The request form asked for specific dates and locations. I entered yesterday's date and the law school building. Within minutes, I had the raw data file. Professor Everett Spalding had badged into his office at 7:10 p.m. The next entry showed a second badge access at 7:14 p.m. A guest pass registered to C. Sollace student, my wife's maiden name, the name she still used for university business. The exit logs showed them leaving together at 9:43 p.m., Almost 2.5 hours. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. The timestamps matched the video perfectly. No room for interpretation, no innocent explanation. Just cold, digital proof that my wife had lied to me, locked herself in a faculty office with her professor, and spent the evening doing God knows what while I sat at home preparing her graduation day surprise. The surprise? I'd almost forgotten. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared weeks ago. Inside were copies of every tuition payment I'd made, every loan document I'd signed, every medical bill and insurance form I'd processed for her father's care. I'd planned to give it to her after graduation, a reminder of how far we'd come together, how much we'd invested in her success. Now, it felt like evidence. The shower was still running. I had maybe 10 minutes before Cambria finished getting ready. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the university's graduation ceremony website. As a major donor, those tuition payments qualified me. I had access to register for speaking opportunities during the ceremony. My finger hovered over the Register as Guest Speaker button. 8 years of my life. 8 years of putting her dreams first, managing her responsibilities, supporting her ambitions. 8 years of believing she was worth the sacrifice. I clicked the button and filled out the form. Guest speaker registration for the donor recognition segment. Topic: the true cost of education. Presentation materials to be uploaded to the venue system by 9 a.m. Submitted. The shower turned off. I closed the laptop and started preparing her father's medications. My movements automatic despite the storm raging in my head. Pills sorted by time and dosage, water glass filled, morning schedule printed and placed on his bedside table. "You're amazing, you know that?" Cambria appeared in the doorway, fully dressed in her black graduation gown. The cap sat perfectly on her styled hair. She looked every inch the successful law school graduate she was about to become. "Just doing what needs to be done," I said. She frowned slightly. "You seem off this morning. Pre-ceremony nerves?" "Something like that." She stepped closer, studying my face. For a moment, I wondered if she could see the knowledge burning behind my eyes, if guilt or fear might flicker across her expression. Instead, she smiled and straightened my tie. "After today, everything changes. No more late study sessions, no more stress about exams. We can finally start planning our real future together. Our future, built on a foundation of lies and betrayal." "Can't wait," I said. She kissed me again, longer this time, and I tasted the bitter irony of it. In 3 hours, she'd be walking across that stage to receive her diploma. In 3 hours, I'd be walking onto that same stage to deliver a very different kind of presentation. "I should go check on Dad," she said. "Will you bring the car around?" Already planned on it. After she left, I returned to my laptop. The presentation upload deadline was 9 a.m., 30 minutes from now. I opened a new document and began typing. The title slide was simple: The True Cost of Education, A Donor's Perspective. The second slide showed a financial summary: 8 years of tuition payments, loan amounts, interest accrued. The total was staggering even to me, seeing it laid out in stark numbers. The third slide displayed the care schedule I'd maintained for her father: doctor appointments, medication management, insurance coordination, hours per week, weeks per year, years of dedicated service. The fourth slide was a timeline: important dates in Cambria's academic career, matched against major sacrifices I'd made, job opportunities I'd turned down to maintain her father's care, promotions I'd deferred to keep our finances stable during her studies. The final slide was a video embed, the same file I'd received that morning, time-stamped and ready to play. I uploaded the presentation to the university system and confirmed its integration with the ceremony's audio-visual setup. In 3 hours, when they called my name during the donor recognition segment, this presentation would display on the main screen, visible to the entire graduating class, their families, and the faculty. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. Well played. She earned this. I turned off the phone and went to bring the car around. The drive to campus was quiet, except for the radio playing softly in the background. Cambria sat beside me, occasionally checking her reflection in the passenger mirror, while her father dozed in the back seat. His medication made him drowsy, but he'd insisted on attending despite his declining health. Professor Spalding said he might have some job opportunities to discuss after graduation, Cambria mentioned casually as we pulled into the university parking garage. Nothing concrete yet, but he has connections at some prestigious firms in Boston. Professor Spalding. The name hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. That's great, honey. You've worked hard for this. He's been incredibly supportive this semester. Really went above and beyond as a mentor. Above and beyond. If only she knew how accurate that phrase was. We found a parking spot near the elevator. As I helped her father out of the car, I noticed Cambria checking her phone with unusual intensity. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing what looked like a lengthy message. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just coordinating with Addie about the reception," she said without looking up. "You know how she gets about social events." Addie was Cambria's best friend from law school, a social media enthusiast who documented every moment of their academic journey online. If anyone would know about Cambria's extracurricular activities, it would be Addie. We made our way to the graduation hall, a grand auditorium that hosted the university's most important ceremonies. The space was already filling with families and faculty. I spotted Professor Spalding near the front, distinguishing himself among his colleagues with his expensive suit and practiced smile. He looked exactly like what he was, a man accustomed to being the center of attention. "I should go find my place with the other graduates," Cambria said, adjusting her cap one final time. "Will you make sure Dad gets a good seat?" "Of course." I watched her walk toward the staging area, noting how her eyes found Professor Spalding in the crowd. He nodded at her, with what appeared to be professional courtesy, but I caught something else in the exchange. A familiarity that went beyond typical student-teacher interaction. I settled her father into an aisle seat near the front, making sure he had his medications and a water bottle within reach. The ceremony program listed the order of events: opening remarks, graduate recognition, donor acknowledgments, diploma presentation, and closing remarks. Donor acknowledgments. My presentation was scheduled for the third segment, right after they recognized the graduating class, but before the actual diploma ceremony. Perfect timing for maximum impact. "Jared Sollace?" A woman approached our row, extending her hand. "I'm Detective Helen Rose, University Security. I believe you're registered to speak during the donor segment?" My pulse quickened. "That's right. Is there a problem?" "Just routine verification. We like to confirm our speakers before the ceremony begins." She glanced at her notes. "Your topic is listed as the true cost of education. Sounds interesting?" "I hope so." Detective Rose studied me with sharp eyes that reminded me of my high school principal, someone who'd seen every possible variation of student mischief and could spot trouble from across a crowded room. "Your presentation materials are already loaded into our system," she continued. "The tech crew ran a quick test this morning. Everything looks good to go." "Excellent." She lingered for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to elaborate on my presentation topic. When I remained silent, she nodded and moved on to verify other speakers. The ceremony began promptly at 10 a.m. The university president delivered opening remarks about academic achievement and the bright futures awaiting the graduating class. Faculty members were introduced, including Professor Spalding, who received enthusiastic applause from the law school section. I watched Cambria during the graduate recognition segment. She stood with her classmates, beaming with pride as their accomplishments were acknowledged. 3 years of law school, magna cum laude honors, law review participation. Her achievements were genuinely impressive, made possible by the foundation of support I'd provided. The irony wasn't lost on me. Without my financial backing and management of her father's care, she never could have dedicated herself so completely to her studies. I'd enabled her success, and she'd used that success to betray me. "Ladies and gentlemen," the university president announced, "we now recognize the generous donors whose support makes our educational mission possible." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The first few donor speakers delivered standard remarks about the value of education and their pride in supporting the university. Polite applause followed each presentation. The audience was warm but restless, eager to move on to the main event of diploma distribution. "Our next speaker is Mr. Jared Sollace," the president announced. "Mr. Sollace has been a significant contributor to our law school program and will share his perspective on educational investment." I stood and walked toward the podium, feeling hundreds of eyes tracking my movement. Cambria looked surprised to see me approaching the stage. She probably assumed I'd declined the speaking opportunity, as I typically avoided public attention. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. The main screen behind me displayed my presentation title, "The True Cost of Education, A Donor's Perspective." "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "My name is Jared Sollace, and for the past 8 years, I've had the privilege of supporting a law school student's education." Scattered applause. Cambria smiled and gave me an encouraging nod from the graduate section. "Today, I want to share with you the real numbers behind that support." I clicked to the next slide. 8 years of tuition payments totaling $237,000. Educational loans co-signed for an additional $92,000. Living expenses, books, and fees bringing the total investment to over $350,000. The audience murmured appreciatively. Large educational investments were common among donor families, and my figures were impressive but not shocking. "But financial investment is only part of the story," I continued, advancing to the care schedule slide. "Supporting a student often means supporting their entire family structure. For 8 years, I've managed the medical care for my wife's father, weekly doctor appointments, daily medication schedules, insurance coordination, and emergency response planning." More approving murmurs. The audience was responding positively to what they perceived as a heartwarming story of family dedication and educational support. I could see Cambria's expression shifting from pride to confusion. She was starting to realize this presentation wasn't following the script she'd expected. "The time investment has been substantial," I said, clicking to the timeline slide. "Job opportunities declined to maintain care schedules. Promotions deferred to preserve financial stability. Personal ambitions set aside to ensure educational success." The auditorium was quieter now. Something in my tone was beginning to signal that this wasn't a typical donor appreciation speech. "All of this investment was made with a simple understanding," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "that we were building something together, that the sacrifices were shared and the benefits would be shared as well." I paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the crowd. Unfortunately, I recently discovered that understanding was not mutual. The silence was complete now. Even the faculty members were paying attention, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. I clicked to the final slide. The video file loaded, and the timestamp appeared clearly on the screen. Yesterday, 7:15 p.m. This video was taken yesterday evening in the law school building. The woman you're about to see is my wife, Cambria Sollace, one of today's graduating students. The video began playing on the main screen. Cambria, walking down the faculty hallway, approaching Professor Spalding's office, entering, and locking the door behind her. The auditorium erupted. Gasps and shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. I could see faculty members turning to stare at Professor Spalding, whose face had drained of all color. "The faculty access logs confirm these timestamps," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Professor Spalding badged into his office at 7:10 p.m. My wife used a guest pass to enter at 7:14 p.m. They remained inside for 2 hours and 29 minutes. Cambria was on her feet now, pushing through the row of graduates toward the aisle. Her mortarboard had fallen off, and her carefully styled hair was coming undone. During this same time period, I continued relentlessly, I was at home preparing her father's evening medications and planning today's graduation celebration. The university president was conferring urgently with other administrators. Professor Spalding had disappeared from his seat among the faculty. Detective Rose was speaking rapidly into her radio. The total cost of my wife's education was $357,000, I concluded, my voice echoing through the stunned auditorium. The cost of learning the truth about what I was really paying for? Priceless. I stepped away from the podium and walked back to my seat, leaving chaos in my wake. The auditorium exploded into chaos as I returned to my seat. Cambria had reached the main aisle and was pushing toward the stage, her graduation gown billowing behind her like storm clouds. Faculty members huddled in urgent conferences, while students craned their necks to get a better view of the unfolding drama. "Jared, stop this!" Cambria's voice carried over the crowd noise. "You don't understand what you're doing!" I sat down next to her father, who was staring at the screen in confusion. His medication made it difficult for him to process rapid changes, but even he could sense that something had gone terribly wrong. "What's happening?" he asked, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Just some graduation day excitement," I said gently. "Nothing for you to worry about." Detective Rose appeared at the end of our row, her expression grim. "Mr. Sollace, I need you to come with me." "Am I under arrest?" "No, but the university administration wants to speak with you immediately. There are also some questions about how you obtained that video." I looked back at the stage, where Cambria had been intercepted by security personnel. She was gesticulating wildly, pointing in my direction, and clearly demanding access to the microphone. The university president was nowhere to be seen, probably in emergency consultation with the legal department. "I'll come willingly," I said, "but I need to make arrangements for my father-in-law first." Detective Rose glanced at the elderly man beside me, taking in his obvious frailty and confusion. "We can have someone from Student Services sit with him." "That won't be necessary." A familiar voice interrupted us. I turned to see Benny Morrison, my work colleague, and one of the few people I'd confided in about Cambria's demanding schedule. "I can stay with him." Benny was an electrical engineer like me, but he worked in the university's facilities department. His presence here wasn't coincidental. I'd asked him to attend the ceremony as backup support, though I hadn't explained exactly what I was planning. "Thanks, Benny." I squeezed her father's hand. "This gentleman will stay with you until I get back. He's a friend of mine." Detective Rose led me through a side exit and down a corridor lined with administrative offices. The sounds of the disrupted ceremony faded behind us, replaced by the urgent buzz of university officials trying to manage an unprecedented crisis. We entered a conference room where 3 people were waiting: the university president, the law school dean, and a woman I didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit that screamed legal counsel. "Mr. Sollace," the president began without preamble, "what you've just done has created a serious situation for this institution." "I shared factual information with an audience that had a right to know," I replied. "Everything I presented can be verified through public records." The legal counsel leaned forward. "How did you obtain that video? If it was recorded without consent, you may have violated state privacy laws." "I received it from an anonymous source. I have no knowledge of how it was obtained." "That's convenient," the law school dean interjected. "Do you expect us to believe you had nothing to do with its creation?" I met his gaze steadily. "I expect you to investigate the conduct it documents. My wife and Professor Spalding were alone in a locked faculty office for over 2 hours. That's a clear violation of university ethics policies." The president rubbed his temples. "Mr. Sollace, I understand you're upset, but public humiliation isn't the appropriate channel for addressing these concerns. We have formal procedures. Formal procedures that would have been handled quietly and internally, I interrupted. How many other students has Professor Spalding mentored in his locked office? How many other families have invested their life savings in educations that came with hidden costs? The legal counsel was taking notes rapidly. Are you alleging a pattern of misconduct? I'm stating facts. Professor Spalding and my wife violated university policy. The evidence is clear and verifiable. What you do with that information is your decision. A knock on the conference room door interrupted the discussion. Detective Rose stepped outside briefly, then returned with a grim expression. The situation in the auditorium has escalated, she reported. Ms. Sollace is demanding to address the audience. Professor Spalding has left the campus, and several news outlets have been contacted about the incident. News outlets. I hadn't expected media attention, but it made sense. A public scandal at a university graduation ceremony would be irresistible to local reporters, especially with the dramatic video evidence. Who contacted the media? The president demanded. Unknown at this time, Detective Rose replied, but social media posts about the incident are already circulating. Someone was live streaming the ceremony. Of course, Addie and her obsession with documenting everything online. By now, clips of my presentation were probably spreading across multiple platforms, reaching audiences far beyond the graduation ceremony attendees. The legal counsel's phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen and paled. Channel 7 News is requesting a statement about faculty misconduct allegations. The story is already being picked up by regional outlets. This is a disaster, the law school dean muttered. This is accountability, I corrected. Something that should have happened through your internal processes, but apparently didn't. The president stood up abruptly. Mr. Sollace, you're free to leave, but I strongly advise you to consult with your own legal counsel. The university will be conducting a full investigation of today's events, including your role in them. I welcome that investigation. Unlike some people, I have nothing to hide. Detective Rose escorted me back toward the auditorium, but we could hear the commotion before we reached the main corridor. Raised voices, shuffling feet, and the general chaos of an event that had completely derailed. The ceremony has been suspended, she informed me. Diplomas will be distributed through individual appointments over the next week. The reception has been canceled. What about my wife? Ms. Sollace is meeting with university officials. She's not handling this well. We reached the auditorium entrance where families were streaming out in confused clusters. Some were angry about the disrupted ceremony, others were fascinated by the scandal, and a few were already sharing cell phone videos with anyone who would watch. I found Benny still sitting with Cambria's father, who looked exhausted by the commotion. How is he? I asked. Confused but stable. I gave him his afternoon medication early, figured the stress wasn't helping. Benny studied my face. You okay? You look like you've been through a blender. Something like that. I helped Cambria's father to his feet. Let's get him home. As we made our way through the crowd toward the parking garage, I caught fragments of conversation that made it clear the story was already taking on a life of its own. Did you see the professor's face when that video started playing? I heard they've been having an affair for months. That poor husband, finding out like that in public. Someone said there might be other students involved. Other students. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. If Professor Spalding was willing to violate ethics policies with Cambria, she probably wasn't his first transgression. My phone, which I'd kept turned off during the ceremony, buzzed back to life as we reached the car. Dozens of missed calls and text messages flooded the screen. Most were from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters who had somehow obtained my contact information. But one message stood out. It was from the same unknown number that had sent me the original video. Phase 1 complete. Check your email for Phase 2. I helped Cambria's father into the car while Benny loaded his wheelchair into the trunk. The old man was falling asleep again, exhausted by the morning's events. "Where to?" Benny asked as we pulled out of the parking garage. "His care facility first. Then I need to go home and figure out what comes next." "What about Cambria?" I glanced back at the university buildings, where my wife was presumably trying to salvage her reputation and her diploma from the wreckage of my public revelation. "Cambria made her choice yesterday evening in Professor Spalding's office. Now she gets to live with the consequences." As we drove through the tree-lined streets surrounding the campus, I couldn't help but notice how normal everything looked. Students walking to classes, faculty members heading to lunch, maintenance crews tending to the carefully manicured grounds. The university would continue functioning as if nothing had happened, while the people involved in today's scandal dealt with the aftermath. But something fundamental had shifted. The careful balance of secrets and lies that had sustained Cambria's double life was now shattered beyond repair. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back to the way things were. My phone buzzed again with another unknown number. This time I answered. "Mr. Sollace, this is Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. I was wondering if you'd be available for an interview about today's events at the university." "No comment," I said, and hung up. But even as I rejected the interview request, I realized that my story was no longer mine to control. The video, the financial records, the timeline of betrayal, all of it was now public information, subject to interpretation and speculation by anyone with an internet connection. I'd wanted accountability. I'd gotten a media circus. The question now was whether I was prepared for everything that came next. We dropped Cambria's father at his assisted living facility, where the nursing staff was well versed in managing his care routine. I'd been coordinating with them for 3 years, ever since his condition had deteriorated to the point where home care became impossible. "Will Cambria be visiting today?" asked Margaret, his primary nurse. "Probably not," I said. "She's dealing with some post-graduation complications." Margaret nodded diplomatically. She'd witnessed enough family drama over the years to recognize when it was better not to ask follow-up questions. Benny drove me home in silence, occasionally glancing at my phone as it continued buzzing with calls and messages. The media attention was intensifying rather than diminishing, which suggested that someone was actively feeding information to reporters. "You want me to stick around?" he asked as we pulled into my apartment complex. "Thanks, but I need to handle this alone." "You sure? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you just declared war on some pretty powerful people. Universities don't like public embarrassment, and faculty members have long memories." He wasn't wrong. Professor Spalding had tenure and connections throughout the legal community. The university administration would prioritize damage control over justice. And Cambria, well, I was about to find out exactly how Cambria planned to respond to having her private life exposed. I climbed the stairs to our second-floor apartment, noting how strange it felt to think of it as our place when everything had changed so fundamentally. The key still worked. The familiar scent of Cambria's perfume still lingered in the hallway, but the emotional landscape was completely different. I opened my laptop and checked my email. Among the dozens of messages from reporters and curious strangers was one from the anonymous sender who had started this entire chain of events. The subject line read, "Phase 2, the complete picture." I opened the message and found a compressed file containing dozens of documents, text message screenshots, email printouts, financial records, and what appeared to be a detailed timeline spanning several months. The first document was a text conversation between Cambria and her friend Addie. "Cambria, Jared is getting suspicious about my study schedule." Addie, "Just tell him you're working on your thesis. Men never question academic stuff." Cambria, "I feel bad lying to him. He's been so supportive." Addie, "Girl, you're about to be a lawyer. Supportive husbands are easy to find. Tenured professors with connections are not." Cambria, Everett says he can get me interviews at 3 different firms in Boston. Addie. See? Investment in your future. Jared will understand eventually. Cambria. Or he won't, and I'll move to Boston without him. I stared at the screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The casual cruelty of that last message was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. She'd been planning to abandon me regardless of whether I discovered her affair. The next document was an email exchange between Cambria and Professor Spalding, Everett, discussing not just their personal relationship, but also grade modifications and preferential treatment in class assignments. Everett, I've adjusted your grade on the constitutional law exam. The original score would have affected your class ranking. Cambria, you're amazing. I don't know how to thank you. Everett, I can think of several ways. My office, Thursday evening. Cambria, always. Should I bring the wine again? Everett, let's make it a celebration. I have news about the Boston interviews. The timestamps showed this exchange had taken place 6 weeks ago. This wasn't a recent development or a moment of weakness. It was a sustained affair that had been influencing Cambria's academic performance for months. I scrolled through more documents, each one adding another layer to the deception. Financial records showing that Professor Spalding had been paying for dinners and weekend trips. Hotel receipts from conferences that Cambria had attended as his research assistant. Even a lease application for a Boston apartment that listed both their names. They'd been planning a life together while I paid her tuition and managed her father's care. My phone rang, displaying Cambria's number for the first time since the ceremony. I let it go to voicemail, then played back her message. Jared, we need to talk. What you did today was... I can't even find words for it. But I understand you're hurt, and I want to explain everything. I'm coming home in an hour. Please don't do anything else until we can discuss this properly. Her voice was controlled but strained. She was clearly trying to manage the situation, probably on advice from University Counsel or Professor Spalding himself. I continued reading through the anonymous documents. Near the end of the file was a note from whoever had compiled this evidence. Mr. Sollace, your wife isn't Professor Spalding's first student affair. There are 3 others over the past 5 years, all following the same pattern: grade inflation, preferential treatment, promises of career advancement, and eventual abandonment when the students graduated. The university has been covering for him because he brings in significant research funding. Your public exposure today was the first time anyone has presented evidence that couldn't be buried through internal channels. If you want justice for all the families he's exploited, this information needs to reach the right people. Attached was a contact list including the State Attorney General's office, the University Board of Trustees, and several investigative journalists who specialized in educational corruption. I was still processing this information when I heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Cambria was home earlier than expected, and she wasn't alone. I could hear at least 2 other voices, one male, one female. The key turned in the lock, and Cambria entered with Professor Spalding and a woman I recognized as the university's legal counsel from our earlier meeting. Jared, Cambria began, her voice carefully modulated. We need to discuss how to resolve this situation. Professor Spalding looked like he'd aged 10 years since the morning. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and his confident demeanor had been replaced by barely controlled panic. Mr. Sollace, the legal counsel said, I'm here to discuss a potential resolution that would benefit everyone involved. I'm listening. The university is prepared to offer you a substantial settlement in exchange for your agreement to retract today's allegations and sign a non-disclosure agreement. I almost laughed. You want to pay me to pretend this never happened? We want to handle this matter with discretion, she continued. Public scandals help no one. Your wife's career prospects, Professor Spalding's reputation, the university's standing in the community, all of these can be preserved if we approach this situation maturely. What about accountability? What about the other students Professor Spalding has exploited? The room went silent. Professor Spalding's face went pale, and the legal counsel's expression shifted from diplomatic to alarmed. "What other students?" Cambria asked. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward them. The evidence file was still displayed, showing the documented pattern of Professor Spalding's misconduct over multiple years. "According to this information, Cambria wasn't your first student affair, Professor. She was just the most recent." Professor Spalding stood up abruptly. "I don't have to listen to this. These are unsubstantiated allegations from an anonymous source." Anonymous, but well documented. Text messages, emails, financial records, hotel receipts. Someone has been keeping very careful track of your activities. The legal counsel was reading over my shoulder, her expression growing more concerned with each document. "Where did you get this?" "Same source as the original video. Someone who apparently believes the public has a right to know when university faculty members abuse their positions." Cambria sank onto the couch, staring at the screen. "Everett, you told me I was special. You said what we had was different." "You are special," he said desperately. "This is all taken out of context. These other situations were completely different." "Different how?" I asked. "Different because those students didn't have husbands paying their tuition? Different because their families weren't sacrificing everything to support their education?" The legal counsel closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "Professor Spalding, I strongly advise you to retain your own counsel immediately. The university can no longer represent your interests in this matter." "What does that mean?" Cambria demanded. "It means," I said, "that the university is cutting him loose to save themselves, and it means your diploma is probably going to be revoked pending an investigation into academic fraud." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Academic fraud? But I earned my grades." "Did you? Or did Professor Spalding modify them in exchange for personal favors? Because according to these emails, your constitutional law exam score was changed after you spent an evening in his office." She turned to Professor Spalding with a look of dawning horror. "You said you were just recognizing my potential. You said the original grading was too harsh." "I was protecting you," he said weakly. "The competition in law school is so intense, and you deserved better than—" "You manipulated my grades?" Her voice was rising. "Everything I've accomplished is tainted because of what you did?" The irony was almost too much to bear. Cambria was finally understanding that she'd been used, but she was focusing on her academic reputation rather than the personal betrayal of our marriage. I think," I said quietly, "it's time for everyone to leave. Cambria, you can collect your belongings, but this is no longer your home. Professor Spalding, I suggest you prepare for a very public investigation. And counselor, you can tell the university that I'm not interested in their settlement offer." "Jared, please," Cambria said, tears streaming down her face. "We can work through this. What Everett and I did was wrong, but we can rebuild—" "No," I interrupted. "We can't. Because this wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was a calculated betrayal that lasted for months. You were planning to leave me regardless of whether I found out. You used my support to build a life that didn't include me." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the campus where this morning's ceremony should have been a celebration of our shared achievement. "The only question now," I continued, "is whether you're going to face the consequences with dignity, or whether this is going to get even messier than it already has." Behind me, I could hear quiet conversation as the three of them discussed their options. But I was done negotiating. The evidence was public, the investigation was inevitable, and the media attention ensured that this story wouldn't be buried through backroom deals. For the first time in 8 years, I was no longer supporting Cambria's ambitions. Now, I was dismantling them. They left after an hour of futile negotiation attempts. Cambria packed 2 suitcases while Professor Spalding and the legal counsel waited in the hallway, their hushed conversation growing more urgent as the afternoon wore on. I sat at my kitchen table, forwarding the anonymous evidence file to the contact list that had been provided. State investigators, university trustees, and 3 different news organizations. Each email I sent felt like another nail in the coffin of my old life, but also like a step towards something cleaner and more honest. My phone had been ringing constantly. I'd finally started answering the calls, giving brief statements to reporters who seemed genuinely interested in the broader implications of the story. The pattern of Professor Spalding's behavior, the university's apparent willingness to overlook faculty misconduct, and the financial impact on families who invested everything in educations that came with hidden costs. "Mr. Sollace, this is Amanda Chen from the Boston Herald," said the latest caller. "We're working on a story about systemic issues in university oversight. Would you be willing to discuss the financial impact of your wife's education?" "The financial impact is documented," I replied. $357,000 over 8 years. But the real cost was the opportunity cost, the career advancement I deferred, the personal goals I set aside, the trust I invested in a relationship that was being systematically undermined. "Have you been contacted by other families in similar situations?" That was a new development. "Other families?" "We've received calls from 3 other families whose daughters were students of Professor Spalding. They're reporting similar patterns: excessive mentoring time, grade improvements that seemed inconsistent with actual performance, and sudden changes in their daughters' career plans that involved moving away from their support systems." I felt a chill of recognition. "Are they willing to go on record?" "2 of them are. The 3rd family is still considering their options. But Mr. Sollace, what you did today appears to have opened the floodgates. The university is facing questions they can't answer with standard public relations responses." After the call ended, I sat in my empty apartment and tried to process the magnitude of what was unfolding. I'd intended to expose Cambria's betrayal and hold Professor Spalding accountable for his misconduct. I hadn't anticipated becoming the catalyst for a broader investigation into systemic corruption. My laptop chimed with a new email from the anonymous source. "Well done. The other families needed someone to show them that silence isn't their only option. Check the local news at 6 p.m. I turned on the television and found Channel 7's early evening broadcast. The lead story was titled, "University Graduation Scandal Exposes Pattern of Faculty Misconduct." The reporter stood outside the university's main administration building, where a small crowd of protesters had gathered with signs reading, "Accountability for All," and "No More Cover-Ups." What began as a personal revelation during this morning's graduation ceremony has evolved into a broader investigation of faculty conduct at the university, the reporter announced. "We've now confirmed that Professor Everett Spalding is the subject of multiple misconduct allegations spanning 5 years. The screen cut to an interview with one of the other families Amanda Chen had mentioned. A middle-aged couple sat stiffly in their living room, their expressions mixing anger with embarrassment. "Our daughter Sarah was a student of Professor Spalding's 3 years ago," the father said. "Her grades improved dramatically during her final semester, and she suddenly decided to move to Boston for an internship he'd arranged. We thought it was a wonderful opportunity." "When did you realize something was wrong?" the reporter asked. "When she stopped coming home for holidays," the mother replied. "When she became evasive about her living situation and defensive about Professor Spalding's role in her career. When we found out the internship was unpaid, but she was somehow affording a luxury apartment. Sarah eventually told us the truth," the father continued. "But by then, her grades had been submitted, her degree had been awarded, and Professor Spalding had moved on to mentoring other students. We felt powerless to do anything about it." The interview continued with similar stories from 2 other families. Each followed the same pattern: exceptional mentoring attention, grade improvements, promises of career advancement, and eventual estrangement from family support systems. "The university has announced a comprehensive review of Professor Spalding's academic conduct," the reporter concluded. Meanwhile, state education officials have opened their own investigation into potential violations of federal Title IX regulations. Title IX. That meant the federal government was now involved, treating this as a civil rights violation rather than just a university personnel matter. The scope of the investigation would be far broader than anything the university could control or contain. My phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Benny's number. "Are you watching the news?" he asked without preamble. "Just finished." "Dude, you've started a revolution. The university's phone system crashed from all the media calls. 3 more professors have been suspended pending investigation. And get this, the state attorney general's office is sending investigators to campus tomorrow." "How do you know all this?" "I work there, remember? The facilities department gets called in for everything. Right now, we're setting up additional phone lines for the crisis management team and installing extra security cameras in the administration building." I rubbed my temples, feeling the weight of unintended consequences. "Benny, I just wanted to expose what Cambria and Professor Spalding did to me. I didn't mean to blow up the entire university." "Maybe not, but you did something that needed doing. You know how many times I've heard whispers about faculty members who get too close to their students? How many complaints that get buried in bureaucratic procedures? You forced this into the open where it can't be ignored." After we hung up, I tried to imagine what Cambria was going through. Her graduation had been canceled, her diploma was under review, her academic achievements were tainted by questions of fraud, and her affair was now public knowledge. The life she'd planned with Professor Spalding was collapsing along with his career and reputation. Part of me felt guilty about the collateral damage, but a larger part of me remembered those text messages where she'd casually discussed abandoning me after graduation, and the emails where she'd accepted grade modifications in exchange for personal favors. She'd made her choices. Now she was experiencing the consequences. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is Sarah Patterson, one of Professor Spalding's former students. I saw the news story about your situation. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. Would you be willing to meet? There are things about his pattern of behavior that haven't been made public yet." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm willing to listen." We arranged to meet the following morning at a coffee shop near campus. As I prepared for bed in my empty apartment, I reflected on how completely my life had changed in a single day. This morning, I'd been a supportive husband preparing to celebrate my wife's graduation. Tonight, I was the central figure in a scandal that was reshaping an entire university. The anonymous evidence provider had been right about one thing. Silence wasn't the only option for families who'd been exploited by Professor Spalding's abuse of power, but speaking up had consequences that extended far beyond anything I'd anticipated. My phone rang one final time before I turned it off for the night. The caller ID showed Cambria's number. "Hello, Cambria." "Jared, please, you have to help me stop this." Her voice was barely controlled panic. "The news stories are destroying everything I've worked for. Law firms are withdrawing job offers. My student loans are being reviewed for fraud. Even Dad's care facility is asking questions about our financial arrangements." "Where are you staying?" "A hotel. Everett. Professor Spalding won't return my calls. I think he's left town." Of course he had. When the scandal became too big to contain, he'd abandoned her just like he'd abandoned his previous students. Cambria was learning the hard way that she'd never been special to him, just convenient. "I'm sorry this is happening to you," I said, and meant it. "But I can't help you fix something that was broken from the beginning." "What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to rebuild my life?" "The same way I'm rebuilding mine, one honest decision at a time." I hung up and turned off the phone, then sat in the darkness of our former shared home. Tomorrow would bring new revelations, new consequences, and new decisions about how to move forward. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, I didn't have to worry about managing anyone else's schedule. supporting anyone else's dreams, or maintaining anyone else's carefully constructed lies. Tonight, I was finally free to figure out what came next. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived the next morning. Sarah Patterson was already waiting at a corner table, nervously stirring a latte that had probably gone cold 20 minutes earlier. She looked younger than I'd expected, maybe 26 or 27, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested a successful professional life. "Mr. Sollace?" She stood as I approached. "Thank you for meeting me. I wasn't sure you'd be willing to talk to strangers about this. Call me Jared, and honestly, after yesterday, talking to strangers feels easier than talking to people I thought I knew." She managed a weak smile. "I saw the news coverage last night. It must be surreal, seeing your personal situation become a public investigation." That's one word for it. I ordered coffee from the counter, then returned to her table. "Your text mentioned things about Professor Spalding that haven't been made public yet." Sarah nodded, pulling out a tablet and opening a document file. "I've been documenting his behavior patterns for 3 years, ever since I realized what had really happened to me. I was hoping to find other victims, but everyone was too afraid or embarrassed to come forward. Until yesterday. Until yesterday. Your presentation at the graduation ceremony was the first time someone publicly challenged him with evidence he couldn't deny or spin. It gave the rest of us permission to stop hiding." She turned the tablet toward me, showing a detailed timeline that made my anonymous evidence file look simplistic by comparison. Names, dates, academic records, financial transactions, and personal testimonies from 5 different students spanning 7 years. "Professor Spalding has a system," Sarah explained. "He identifies students who are academically talented but financially vulnerable, students whose families are making significant sacrifices to support their education. He positions himself as a mentor and advocate, gradually increasing the personal attention until the boundaries become blurred. And the students don't recognize what's happening? We're flattered by the attention from a prestigious faculty member. We're grateful for the academic support and career guidance, and we're terrified of losing those advantages if we question his methods." She scrolled through several pages of documentation. "He's very careful about escalation. Nothing happens quickly enough to trigger obvious red flags." I studied the timeline, noting the similarities to Cambria's experience. Extended office hours, grade improvements, promises of career advancement, gradual isolation from family support systems. "What finally made you realize what had happened?" "When I found out I wasn't the only one. I was working at a law firm in Boston, a position he'd helped me secure, when I met another woman who'd had a similar experience with him 2 years earlier. We compared notes and realized we'd both followed identical patterns." Sarah pulled up another document showing financial records. "He also has a network of contacts who provide jobs and opportunities for his former students. Nothing illegal, but it creates a system where speaking out against him would damage our own career prospects. A closed loop of mutual dependence." "Exactly. He helps us professionally, we stay quiet about his personal conduct, and everyone benefits except the families who are funding these arrangements without knowing the real terms." I thought about my own situation. 8 years of financial support and personal sacrifice, all based on the assumption that I was investing in our shared future rather than subsidizing my wife's affair with her professor. How many others are there? At least 12 students over the past decade, probably more. Most of them are too established in their careers now to risk the exposure that would come with formal complaints. But 3 of us are willing to testify if this investigation goes to court. "What do you need from me?" Sarah closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "Your public disclosure yesterday changed the dynamic. The university can't handle this through internal procedures anymore, and Professor Spalding can't rely on intimidation or career threats to keep people quiet. But the investigation needs to be thorough enough to establish the full pattern, not just focus on individual incidents." "Meaning?" meaning the families who supported these students deserve to know how their investments were manipulated. The university administration needs to be held accountable for ignoring obvious warning signs, and the professional network that enabled this behavior needs to be exposed. I understood what she was asking. My role in this scandal had evolved from victim to catalyst, and now she was suggesting I become an advocate for systematic reform. What would that look like practically? Coordinated testimony from multiple families, media interviews that focus on institutional failures rather than personal drama, cooperation with state investigators to ensure the scope of their inquiry includes financial fraud and civil rights violations. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Amanda Chen at the Boston Herald. I let it go to voicemail, but Sarah noticed my hesitation. "You're having second thoughts about the media attention." "I'm having second thoughts about everything. Yesterday morning I was planning to surprise my wife with a romantic dinner after her graduation ceremony. Now I'm apparently leading a crusade against university corruption." "You don't have to lead anything," Sarah said gently. "But you've already started something that's bigger than your personal situation. The question is whether you're willing to see it through to a conclusion that actually creates change." I thought about Cambria's phone call the night before, her panic about withdrawn job offers and financial reviews. I thought about the other families who'd invested everything in their children's educations without knowing about the hidden costs. I thought about Professor Spalding, probably in another state by now, planning his next career move and his next group of vulnerable students. What's the timeline? The state investigation will take months, but the initial interviews start next week. The university's internal review is moving faster. They want to demonstrate responsiveness without admitting liability, and the media coverage is creating pressure for quick resolution. Quick resolution usually means scapegoating a few individuals while preserving the system that enabled them. Exactly. Unless there's sustained pressure for comprehensive reform. I finished my coffee and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "What do you need me to do?" Sarah smiled for the first time since we'd sat down. "Tell your story to the state investigators. Provide financial documentation that shows the real cost of Professor Spalding's misconduct, and help us coordinate with other families so the investigation addresses the systemic issues instead of just the individual violations." "And Cambria?" "Your wife made choices that contributed to this situation. She's facing consequences for those choices. That's not your responsibility to fix." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. For 8 years, I'd been responsible for managing Cambria's challenges and supporting her goals. The habit of protecting her from consequences had become so automatic that I'd almost offered to help her navigate the scandal she'd created. But Sarah was right. Cambria's problems were no longer mine to solve. "I'll do it," I said, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" "When this is over, I want to make sure other families have better information about what they're really investing in when they support a student's education. Not just the financial costs, but the warning signs of exploitation and the resources available if something goes wrong." "That's not a condition," Sarah said, standing up and extending her hand. "That's the whole point." As we shook hands, I realized that my revenge against Cambria and Professor Spalding had transformed into something much larger and more meaningful. I was no longer just exposing their betrayal. I was helping to dismantle a system that had enabled their behavior and protected them from accountability. My phone buzzed again with another media call. This time I answered. "This is Jared Sollace." "Mr. Sollace, this is Detective Helen Rose from University Security. Could you come to campus this afternoon? The state investigators would like to speak with you about your allegations against Professor Spalding." "I'll be there. And Mr. Sollace, bring all your documentation. This investigation is going to be very thorough." I hung up and looked at Sarah, who was gathering her materials. "It's starting. It started yesterday when you walked onto that stage." she replied. Now we're just going to finish what you began. As I left the coffee shop and headed home to prepare for the afternoon interview, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 years, the satisfaction of pursuing my own goals instead of supporting someone else's dreams. The investigation would be difficult, the media attention would be intrusive, and the personal costs would be significant. But for the first time since this whole situation began, I was moving toward something constructive rather than just away from something destructive. Professor Spalding had built his career on exploiting the trust and sacrifice of families like mine. Today, that career was going to start collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions, and I was going to make sure the collapse was complete. Campus felt different in daylight, too clean, too calm, like the place itself was pretending nothing had happened. Detective Rose met me at the security office and walked me straight past the front desk, past 2 stunned student workers, into a windowless interview room where 3 state investigators waited with laptops open and faces like stone. "Mr. Sollace," the lead investigator said, "we're going to ask you for a timeline, documents, and anything you have that supports grade manipulation or coercion." I set my folder down and slid it across the table. Tuition statements, co-signed loans, care logs, and the email printouts. Spalding's words, black on white, impossible to explain away. Halfway through, Rose's radio hissed. Her posture snapped upright. "Copy," she said, already moving. "He's on campus." The lead investigator looked up. "Who?" "Professor Spalding," Rose replied. "Facilities camera just caught him entering the law school building through a side door." My throat tightened. He left town. "People say a lot of things when they're panicking," Rose said, and nodded at me. "Stay here." But the investigator stood. "No. If he's here for a reason. Let's go." We moved fast, through a back corridor, down a service stairwell, out into the cold bite of afternoon air. The law school sat ahead, glass and brick and prestige. It looked like a place where reputations were minted and buried. As we crossed the quad, I spotted Cambria near the steps. No gown now, just a blazer too sharp for a day that had already cut her open. Her eyes locked on mine like she'd been waiting. "Jared," she called, voice breaking on the second syllable. "Tell them it was personal. Tell them you were angry. Please." Behind her, Addie hovered, phone in hand, still filming like oxygen depended on it. I didn't stop walking. "This isn't personal anymore." Cambria flinched like I'd slapped her. "You're ruining me." "You ruined you," I said, and kept moving. Inside, the hallway smelled like polished floors and money. Rose led us toward Spalding's office. Same door from the video, same brass nameplate. The lock was intact, but the sound from inside wasn't quiet. Drawers opening, files shifting, someone moving with speed and purpose. Rose raised her hand. "Professor Spalding, University Security, open the door." A pause, then the click of a latch, and Spalding stepped out, holding a slim leather briefcase, coat thrown over one arm like he was late for a flight. His face was composed, too composed, until his eyes found me behind Rose. The composure cracked. "Jared," he said, voice low, "this is a mistake." Rose stepped between us. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Spalding smiled with the wrong kind of confidence. "On what grounds?" The lead investigator held up a badge. "State inquiry into academic misconduct and abuse of position. You don't get to debate it in the hallway." Spalding's jaw tightened. "I'm not discussing anything without counsel." "Fine," the investigator said. "Then don't. Hand over the briefcase." Spalding's grip tightened like the leather was a lifeline. "Those are personal documents." "And that's exactly why we're taking them," Rose said. He pivoted, fast, shoulder dropping like a man who'd practiced slipping past people who weren't ready. He clipped Rose's arm, surged down the hall, and for a split second the world went pure instinct. Rose lunged, missed. Spalding ran. The investigator shouted, "Stop!" and took off. I moved too, legs reacting before my brain could argue. Spalding hit the stairwell door and slammed through it, boots pounding down the steps. Rose was right behind him. I caught the railing, took the stairs 2 at a time, hearing my breath turn harsh and metallic. He burst out into the underground garage, rows of cars, concrete columns, the echo of footsteps multiplying the panic. He headed straight for a dark sedan near the exit ramp, keys already in his hand. Rose closed the distance. "Spalding, don't—" He swung the briefcase, not at her face, just hard enough to create space. It clipped her shoulder. She stumbled. Something in me snapped clean. I grabbed his wrist as he reached for the driver's door. His eyes flashed, shocked that I'd touched him, that the supportive husband had hands capable of stopping him. "Let go," he hissed. 8 years, I said through my teeth. "You don't get to walk away from this like it's a bad lecture." He tried to wrench free. I didn't punch him. I didn't need to. I twisted his wrist just enough to make him release the keys. They skittered across the concrete. Rose was on him instantly, pinning his arm, snapping cuffs on with a sound like a final period. Spalding's breath came in short bursts, eyes wild now. "You have no idea what you've done." "I do," I said, and nodded toward the briefcase now in the investigator's hands. "And now so will everyone else." Cambria appeared at the